Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the pristine briefing room aboard the USS Constellation, her service dress blues immaculate despite the early morning hour. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows across her angular face, highlighting the determination etched in her features. At 32, she had already commanded 2 destroyers with distinction, but today marked the beginning of something entirely different. Admiral Robert Harrison entered the room with his characteristic swagger, his silver hair perfectly groomed and his chest decorated with enough ribbons to wallpaper a small apartment. Behind him followed Captain James Rodriguez and Lieutenant Commander David Park, both men wearing expressions that suggested they had already been briefed on what was about to unfold. "Commander Mitchell," Admiral Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in the Navy. He settled into the leather chair at the head of the conference table, gesturing for the others to sit. "I trust you're ready for your new assignment." Sarah remained standing until explicitly told to sit. "Yes, sir. I've reviewed the preliminary briefings on Task Force Phoenix." The Admiral's lips curled into what might generously be called a smile, though it held no warmth. "Have you now? And what exactly do you think you know about commanding a carrier strike group?" "I understand that Task Force Phoenix consists of the aircraft carrier USS Phoenix, 2 guided missile cruisers for destroyers, 2 attack submarines, and a fast combat support ship. The mission parameters involve extended deployment in the South China Sea with potential for rapid response scenarios." Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the polished table surface. "Technical specifications are one thing, Commander. Actually commanding 11,000 sailors and Marines is quite another." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Tell me, what's your call sign again?" Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Iron Widow, sir." The Admiral burst into laughter, a sound that echoed off the briefing room walls like gunfire. Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Lieutenant Commander Park studied his hands with sudden fascination. Admiral Harrison wiped his eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. "Iron Widow," he repeated between chuckles. "Good Lord, who came up with that melodramatic nonsense? Sounds like something out of a comic book." He shook his head, still grinning. "I suppose the Public Relations Department thought it sounded fierce enough for the first woman to command a carrier strike group." Sarah's face remained composed, though her knuckles whitened where her hands rested on her lap. "The call sign was assigned during my deployment aboard the USS Vanguard, sir. It refers to my tactical approach during the Persian Gulf incident." "Oh yes, the famous Persian Gulf incident," Admiral Harrison said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Will you supposedly turn the tide of battle with some miraculous tactical maneuver?" "I've read the reports, Commander. Impressive work for a destroyer captain, I'll grant you that. But commanding a single ship and commanding an entire strike group are worlds apart." The briefing room fell silent except for the distant hum of the ship's ventilation system. Through the porthole, Sarah could see the gray waters of Norfolk Harbor, where dozens of Navy vessels sat at anchor like sleeping giants. Somewhere out there, the USS Phoenix waited for her command. "With respect, sir," Sarah said carefully, "every command begins with understanding the individual components. A strike group is still composed of ships and sailors, each with specific capabilities and limitations." Admiral Harrison's amusement faded slightly. "Is that so? And I suppose you think you understand those capabilities better than the men who've been commanding carrier groups since before you graduated from the Naval Academy." "I believe I understand my own capabilities, sir. And I trust in the capabilities of my crew." "Your crew," the Admiral repeated slowly. "Commander, you haven't even met most of your crew yet. You have no idea what you're walking into." He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "The USS Phoenix isn't some small destroyer where everyone knows everyone else's name. You're about to take command of a floating city with more firepower than most small countries possess." Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat diplomatically. "Admiral, if I may, Commander Mitchell's record speaks for itself. Her innovations in anti-submarine warfare during the Baltic exercises were noted by NATO Command, and her leadership during the humanitarian crisis in the Philippines demonstrated exceptional. Thank you, Captain Rodriguez. Admiral Harrison cut him off with a wave of his hand. I'm well aware of Commander Mitchell's decorated career. What I'm questioning is whether those decorations translate to the realities of Carrier Group Command. He turned back to Sarah. Tell me, Iron Widow, what happens when you have to make a decision that affects 11,000 lives in the span of 30 seconds? Sarah met his gaze steadily. The same thing that happens when you make a decision affecting 300 lives in 30 seconds, sir. You rely on your training, your experience, and your crew. The scale changes, but the fundamentals remain the same. The fundamentals, Admiral Harrison mused. How wonderfully simple you make it sound. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the porthole. Let me tell you about the fundamentals, Commander. Last month, Admiral Chen's strike group encountered Chinese submarines in disputed waters. He had 15 minutes to decide whether to engage or withdraw. 15 minutes to balance American interests against the potential for global conflict. His decision prevented a war, but it cost him his career when politicians back home decided he was too aggressive. The Admiral turned back to face the room. Admiral Chun had 25 years of carrier experience. He'd commanded 3 different strike groups and knew the South China Sea like his own backyard. And still, one decision ended everything he'd worked for. He fixed Sarah with a piercing stare. What makes you think you're ready for that kind of responsibility? Sarah stood up slowly, her posture remaining perfectly erect. Because responsibility isn't about being ready, sir. It's about accepting it when duty calls. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Admiral Chun made his decision based on his experience and judgment. I can only promise to do the same with mine. Your experience? Admiral Harrison laughed again, though this time it sounded more bitter than amused. 2 years commanding destroyers. Most of my captains have more experience than that. Then, I'll learn from them, sir. A good commander surrounds herself with experienced officers and listens to their counsel. Herself, the Admiral repeated. There's the crux of it, isn't it? This whole assignment is about politics, not capability. The Secretary of the Navy wants headlines about breaking barriers and glass ceilings. The reality of naval command is secondary to the optics. Lieutenant Commander Park finally looked up from his hands. Sir, if I may, the selection board reviewed over 30 candidates for this position. Commander Mitchell was chosen based on her tactical acumen and leadership potential, not gender. Admiral Harrison waved dismissively. Of course she was, David, and I'm sure the fact that she's photogenic and articulate had nothing to do with it. He returned to his seat, leaning back with his arms crossed. Don't misunderstand me, Commander Mitchell. I have nothing personal against you, but this assignment puts politics ahead of practicality, and that makes me nervous. Sarah remained standing, her voice steady and professional. Admiral, I understand your concerns, but I didn't ask for this assignment because of my gender, and I won't use it as an excuse if I fail. I'm here because the Navy believes I can do the job. The Navy believes many things, Commander. The question is whether those beliefs align with reality. Admiral Harrison pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. These are your operational orders. Task Force Phoenix will deploy to the South China Sea in 6 weeks. Your primary mission is freedom of navigation operations, but you'll also be conducting joint exercises with Allied forces and maintaining readiness for rapid response scenarios. He slid the folder across the table towards Sarah. The Phoenix Battle Group includes some of the most advanced technology in the Navy's arsenal. Aegis combat systems, advanced radar arrays, electronic warfare capabilities that are still classified. Your ships carry enough firepower to level a small nation. Sarah picked up the folder, noting its considerable weight. I understand the gravity of the responsibility, sir. Do you? Admiral Harrison's voice softened slightly. Commander, I've been in the Navy for 31 years. I've seen good officers destroyed by commands they weren't ready for, and I've seen bad officers promoted beyond their abilities because someone thought they looked good in uniform. The South China Sea isn't a training ground. It's a powder keg where one mistake can have global consequences. The briefing room fell quiet again. Through the porthole, Sarah could see a nuclear submarine gliding silently toward the open ocean, its dark hull cutting through the water like a predator. Soon, she would be responsible for coordinating vessels just like that one. Captain Rodriguez spoke up again. "Admiral, what's the timeline for Commander Mitchell to assume command?" "She'll have 2 weeks of intensive briefings with her senior staff, followed by 2 weeks of exercises in the Atlantic. Then, deployment." Admiral Harrison looked directly at Sarah. "That's 4 weeks to learn everything you need to know about commanding a carrier strike group. Most officers get 2 years of preparation." "Then, I'll have to be a fast learner, sir." Admiral Harrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Commander, let me give you some advice. The men and women under your command don't care about your call sign or your reputation. They care about whether you can bring them home alive. Everything else is just noise." "Understand, sir. I hope you do." The Admiral stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Your senior staff briefing is at 1,400 hours. I suggest you use the time between now and then to familiarize yourself with the personnel files of your key officers. Some of them have been waiting years for this assignment." As Admiral Harrison moved toward the door, he paused and looked back. "One more thing, Commander. The media attention around this assignment means every decision you make will be scrutinized. Success will be attributed to the progressive Navy giving women opportunities. Failure will be blamed on political correctness, undermining military effectiveness." He met her eyes. "Either way, the focus won't be on your actual performance as a commander." Sarah nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning, sir." "It's not a warning, Commander. It's reality. Learn to live with it." Admiral Harrison straightened his uniform jacket. "Gentlemen, Commander Mitchell, good day." After the Admiral left, the briefing room seemed larger somehow. Captain Rodriguez gathered his papers while Lieutenant Commander Park remained seated, both men clearly processing what they had just witnessed. "He's not wrong about the scrutiny," Captain Rodriguez said quietly. "Every move you make will be analyzed and dissected." Sarah finally allowed herself to sit down, the weight of the assignment settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "I've been dealing with scrutiny my entire career, Captain. This is just a larger stage." "The South China Sea is more than a larger stage," Lieutenant Commander Park added. "It's the most volatile region in the world right now. Chinese naval expansion, territorial disputes, freedom of navigation challenges. Every day brings new tensions." Sarah opened the operational folder, scanning the first page of orders. The language was formal and precise, but between the lines lay the reality of her new responsibility. Thousands of lives, billions of dollars in equipment, and potentially the balance of power in the Pacific Ocean. "Tell me about the Phoenix," she said. Captain Rodriguez smiled for the first time since entering the room. "She's a Nimitz-class carrier, commissioned in 1995. Nuclear-powered, 97,000 tons, over 1,000 feet long. She carries approximately 90 aircraft, including F/18 Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, and MH-60 are Seahawks. Crew, approximately 5,000 ship's company, plus 1,500 air wing personnel. The battle group adds another 4,500 sailors across the escort vessels." Lieutenant Commander Park pulled out his tablet. "Your air wing commander is Captain Lisa Thompson, one of the most experienced aviators in the fleet. Your chief of staff is Captain Michael Barnes, former destroyer squadron commander." Sarah nodded, making mental notes. "What about the Chinese presence in the area?" "Growing more assertive every month," Captain Rodriguez replied. "They've been testing our responses, pushing boundaries, seeing how far they can go without triggering a direct confrontation. Your predecessor, Admiral Chun, had several close encounters during his deployment. Too close, according to some," Lieutenant Commander Park added. "That's part of why Admiral Harrison is nervous about this assignment. The political pressure to avoid incidents while maintaining American presence is enormous." Sarah closed the folder and stood up. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your candor. I know this assignment carries unique challenges, both operational and political. But I didn't accept this command to make history or break barriers. I accepted it to serve my country and my sailors. As she walked toward the door, Captain Rodriguez called out, "Commander, for what it's worth, we've reviewed your tactical innovations during the Baltic exercises. Your approach to coordinated anti-submarine warfare was brilliant." Sarah paused at the threshold. "Thank you, Captain. But past performance doesn't guarantee future success. We'll have to prove ourselves every day." After leaving the briefing room, Sarah walked through the corridors of the USS Constellation, her mind racing with the magnitude of what lay ahead. Sailors she passed offered crisp salutes, their faces showing curiosity about the officer who would soon command the most powerful naval force in the Pacific. She found herself on the flight deck, where the noise and activity of carrier operations continued around the clock. Aircraft handlers moved with practiced precision, their color-coded jerseys creating a carefully choreographed ballet of organized chaos. The smell of jet fuel and salt air filled her lungs as she watched an F/A-18 Super Hornet prepare for launch. In 6 weeks, she would stand on a similar deck aboard the USS Phoenix, responsible for coordinating not just the aircraft operations, but the movements of an entire strike group. The thought should have been overwhelming, but instead, Sarah felt a familiar calm settling over her mind. It was the same feeling she had experienced before every major command decision in her career. Admiral Harrison's laughter still echoed in her memory, along with his dismissive comments about her call sign, Iron Widow. The name had been earned during a particularly intense engagement in the Persian Gulf, where her tactical decisions had turned certain defeat into decisive victory. The title hadn't been chosen for its dramatic effect, but for the cold precision with which she had dismantled enemy forces. As the sun began to set over Norfolk Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to the thousands of sailors who would soon be under her command. She would prove that merit, not politics, had earned her this position. She would show Admiral Harrison and every other skeptic that leadership wasn't defined by gender or call signs, but by the ability to make the right decisions when everything was on the line. The path ahead would be treacherous, filled with diplomatic minefields and military challenges that could reshape global politics. But Sarah Mitchell had never backed down from challenge in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. The Iron Widow was ready for war. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the USS Phoenix for the first time as its commanding officer. The carrier stretched out before her like a floating city, its flight deck bustling with activity as aircraft prepared for morning operations. The ship's massive island superstructure rose behind her, bristling with radar arrays and communication equipment that connected Task Force Phoenix to naval commands around the world. Captain Thompson, requesting permission to launch the morning CP, announced Commander Patricia Williams, the ship's operations officer. Her voice carried the crisp professionalism that had made her one of the most respected surface warfare officers in the fleet. Sarah nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the positions of her entire strike group. The 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers, USS Gettysburg and USS Chosen, maintained their screening positions to port and starboard. The 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers formed a protective diamond around the formation, their Aegis radar systems creating an overlapping bubble of electronic surveillance. Somewhere beneath the surface, the attack submarines USS Virginia and USS Texas prowled silently, invisible guardians against underwater threats. "Permission granted," Sarah replied. "Maintain standard patrol pattern, but keep them ready for immediate recall." The sound of jet engines spooling up echoed across the flight deck as 2F divided by a -18E Super Hornets prepared for launch. Sarah watched through the bridge windows as the catapult officer gave the final signal, and the first aircraft shot forward, accelerating from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. The massive carrier barely trembled from the launch, its nuclear-powered engines maintaining steady course and speed through the gray waters of the Atlantic. Captain Michael Barnes, her chief of staff, approached with a communications tablet in hand. At 45, Barnes had commanded 3 different destroyers and served as executive officer on 2 carriers. His weathered face bore the marks of 23 years at sea, and his reputation for tactical brilliance had made him a sought-after staff officer. "Ma'am, we're receiving updates from Pacific Fleet Intelligence regarding Chinese naval movements in the South China Sea," Barnes said, handing her the tablet. "It appears they've increased their submarine activity near the Spratly Islands." Sarah reviewed the intelligence summary, noting the locations of suspected Chinese submarine contacts. The Spratly Islands have been a source of territorial disputes for decades, with China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei all claiming various portions of the strategically vital archipelago. The region contained significant oil and natural gas reserves, but more importantly, it controlled some of the world's most crucial shipping lanes. "How many contacts are we talking about?" Sarah asked. "At least 4 nuclear-attack submarines, possibly 6, Barnes replied. "Our attack boats in the region have been tracking them for the past week, but the Chinese are being unusually aggressive in their patrol patterns." Sarah handed the tablet back and moved to the chart table, where a large-scale map of the South China Sea displayed current intelligence assessments. Red symbols marked confirmed Chinese military positions, while blue symbols showed American and Allied forces. The density of contacts in the disputed waters resembled a chess game, where both players had moved their pieces to the edge of direct confrontation. "What's Admiral Harrison's assessment of the situation?" she asked. "He wants us to maintain our planned deployment schedule, but he's authorized us to accelerate our training exercises," Barnes said. "We'll be conducting anti-submarine warfare drills with the Norfolk-based attack submarines this afternoon." Captain Lisa Thompson, the Air Wing commander, climbed the ladder to the bridge with her characteristic energy. At 38, Thompson was one of the youngest Air Wing commanders in the Navy, having earned her position through exceptional skill as both a pilot and a tactician. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the steady focus that had made her one of the most decorated naval aviators of her generation. "Commander Mitchell," Thompson said, offering a crisp salute. "The morning CAP is airborne and establishing patrol stations. I wanted to discuss the afternoon ASW exercise with you." Sarah returned the salute and gestured toward the chart table. "What's your assessment of our readiness for submarine threats?" Thompson pulled out her own tablet, displaying Air Wing tactical formations. "We've been running continuous training with our MH-60R Seahawks, but the Chinese submarines represent a more sophisticated threat than anything we've faced in exercises. Their new Type 093 attack submarines are quieter than their predecessors and carry advanced torpedoes. How do our detection capabilities compare to the Chinese submarine technology?" "Our sonar systems are still superior, especially when coordinated with the escort vessels and attack submarines," Thompson explained. "But the Type 093s have been designed specifically to counter American anti-submarine warfare tactics. They're not as quiet as our Virginia-class boats, but they're quiet enough to pose a significant challenge." Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the complex choreography required to coordinate anti-submarine operations across an entire strike group. Each platform brought unique capabilities. The destroyers and cruisers provided long-range sonar detection. The helicopters offered rapid response and precise weapon delivery, and the attack submarines served as both hunters and protective escorts. "Captain Thompson, I want you to modify the standard ASW patrol patterns," Sarah said. "Instead of the traditional radial search, I want to try something different." Both Thompson and Barnes looked intrigued. Sarah moved to the chart table and began sketching formations with a grease pencil. "The Chinese have been studying our tactics for years. They know how we typically deploy our ASW assets, and they've designed their submarines to exploit the gaps in our standard patterns." She drew a series of overlapping circles around the carrier symbol. "Instead of fixed patrol routes, I want our helicopters to use randomized search patterns based on oceanographic data. The Seahawks will coordinate with the attack submarines to create unpredictable detection zones that force enemy submarines to react instead of simply avoiding known patrol areas." Captain Thompson studied the diagram. It's innovative, but it requires exceptional coordination between air and subsurface assets. The timing has to be perfect to avoid detection gaps. That's why we're going to practice until it becomes second nature, Sarah replied. The Chinese submarines are counting on predictability. If we can make our ASW operations truly random while maintaining effective coverage, we neutralize their advantage. Barnes nodded approvingly. It reminds me of your tactics during the Baltic exercises. You used unpredictability to force the opposition into reactive positions instead of allowing them to execute planned strategies. Exactly. But this requires trust and communication between every unit in the strike group. Sarah looked out at the escort vessels maintaining their positions around the carrier. Every captain needs to understand that their ship is part of a larger tactical organism, not an independent unit. The afternoon ASW exercise began with the arrival of 2 Virginia-class attack submarines from Norfolk. Sarah watched from the bridge as her air wing launched 6 MH-60R Seahawks, their sophisticated sonar equipment and anti-submarine weapons making them the most advanced submarine hunters in the world. The exercise scenario involved the submarines attempting to penetrate the strike group's defenses while the surface vessels and helicopters worked to detect and track them. Contact bearing 027, range 12,000 yards, announced Petty Officer First Class Jennifer Davis from the sonar station. Possible submarine signature. Sarah moved to the tactical action officer's position, where multiple screens displayed real-time sonar data from across the strike group. The suspected contact appeared as a faint blip on the display, its signature consistent with a nuclear submarine, but not yet confirmed as hostile or friendly. Seahawk 77, investigate contact bearing 027. Captain Thompson ordered over the radio. Coordinate with USS Virginia for positive identification. The helicopter pilot acknowledged and adjusted course toward the contact. On the tactical display, Sarah could see the complex dance of detection and evasion playing out across miles of ocean. The submarine was attempting to use thermal layers in the water to mask its signature, while the helicopter and attack submarine worked together to maintain contact. "Ma'am, the submarine is changing course," reported Commander Williams. "Now bearing 035, increasing speed." Sarah watched the tactical picture evolve, noting how the submarine's movement revealed information about its capabilities and intentions. Alert all ASW assets. This submarine is more maneuverable than our intelligence assessment suggested. The exercise continued for 3 hours, with the submarines attempting increasingly sophisticated evasion tactics, while the strike group refined its detection and tracking procedures. Sarah's randomized patrol patterns proved effective in maintaining contact, but they also revealed weaknesses in coordination between different platforms. Captain Thompson, have Seahawk 79 establish a holding pattern at grid reference Bravo 7, Sarah ordered. I want to test the submarine's reaction to an apparently random helicopter position. The helicopter moved to the designated position, seemingly patrolling an empty area of ocean. Within minutes, the submarine contact began moving toward what appeared to be a gap in the ASW coverage, exactly as Sarah had anticipated. Submarines are predictable when they think they've identified a pattern, she explained to Barnes. By creating false patterns, we can influence their movements and drive them into areas where our detection capabilities are strongest. The exercise concluded with successful tracking of both submarines, but Sarah knew that real combat would present far greater challenges. Chinese submarines would have more advanced countermeasures and would be operating in familiar waters with detailed knowledge of oceanographic conditions. That evening, Sarah convened a meeting of her senior officers in the carrier's main conference room. The assembled group represented decades of combined naval experience. Captain Thompson with her air combat expertise, Captain Barnes with his strategic planning background, Commander Williams with her surface warfare specialization, and Captain Robert McKenzie, commanding officer of the USS Gettysburg, participating via video link. Today's exercise revealed both strengths and weaknesses in our ASW capabilities, Sarah began. The randomized patrol patterns were effective in maintaining contact, but our coordination between platforms needs improvement. Captain McKenzie's voice came through the speakers with typical bluntness. Commander Mitchell, with respect, the coordination issues stem from using non-standard tactics without sufficient preparation time. My sonar operators were confused by the helicopter movements. Sarah nodded, appreciating the honest feedback. Captain McKenzie raises an important point. Innovation requires training, and we have limited time before deployment. However, I believe the tactical advantages of unpredictable ASW operations outweigh the short-term coordination challenges. What specific training modifications are you proposing? Asked Captain Thompson. Sarah activated the room's display screen, showing a detailed training schedule. We'll conduct daily ASW exercises for the remaining 2 weeks before deployment. Each exercise will introduce new variables while building muscle memory for the basic coordination requirements. By the time we reach the South China Sea, these tactics should be instinctive. Commander Williams looked up from her notes. Ma'am, what about the political sensitivities? Admiral Harrison specifically warned about avoiding incidents that could escalate tensions. Our mission is to maintain freedom of navigation while deterring aggressive actions, Sarah replied. The best way to avoid incidents is to be so thoroughly prepared that potential adversaries choose not to test our resolve. Weakness invites aggression, while demonstrated competence encourages restraint. The meeting continued past midnight, with detailed discussions of tactical procedures, contingency plans, and coordination protocols. Sarah could see the initial skepticism in her officers' faces gradually transforming into professional respect as they recognized the sophistication of her tactical thinking. Captain Barnes lingered after the other officers departed. Commander, I have to say, your approach reminds me of some of the best tactical innovators I've served with. Admiral Chen used to emphasize the importance of forcing enemies to react rather than allowing them to execute planned strategies. Sarah gathered her notes, feeling the weight of comparison to her predecessor. Admiral Chen paid a price for his tactical aggressiveness. I intend to learn from both his successes and his mistakes. The key difference is timing, Barnes observed. Chen was reactive, responding to Chinese provocations with escalating force. Your approach seems more proactive, establishing conditions that discourage provocations in the first place. As Sarah walked through the carrier's passageways toward her quarters, she reflected on the day's exercises and the challenges that lay ahead. The USS Phoenix hummed with activity even in the late hours, its nuclear reactors providing endless power for the complex systems that kept 5,000 sailors alive and operational in the middle of the ocean. Her stateroom was small but efficiently arranged with a desk, computer terminal, and narrow bunk that would be her home for the next 6 months. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of her parents at her Naval Academy graduation, their faces beaming with pride as she received her commission. Sarah sat at her desk and opened her laptop, reviewing intelligence updates from the South China Sea. Chinese naval activity had increased significantly over the past week, with multiple submarine contacts reported near traditional American patrol areas. The pattern suggested either routine exercises or preparation for a more significant operation. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Harrison. The text was brief, but ominous. Chinese naval exercises scheduled to coincide with your arrival in theater. Expect increased tensions. Avoid provocations, but maintain mission objectives. Good luck. Sarah stared at the message for several minutes, understanding the impossible balance she would be required to maintain. Too much caution would signal American weakness and invite further Chinese aggression. Too much assertiveness could trigger the kind of incident that had ended Admiral Chen's career. But, as she prepared for sleep, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had carried her through every challenging command in her career. Tomorrow would bring new exercises, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that the Iron Widow was ready for whatever the South China Sea might bring. Admiral Harrison's laughter still echoed in her memory, but soon he would learn that underestimating Commander Sarah Mitchell was a mistake that enemies and allies made only once. 3 weeks into deployment, Task Force Phoenix cut through the azure waters of the South China Sea under a blazing tropical sun. The USS Phoenix maintained course toward the disputed Paracel Islands, where freedom of navigation operations would test both American resolve and Chinese restraint. Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge wing, binoculars trained on the horizon where intelligence reports suggested Chinese naval forces waited. "Ma'am, we have multiple surface contacts bearing 180, range 42 miles, announced Lieutenant Commander Kevin Walsh from the Combat Information Center. His voice carried the tension that had been building throughout the strike group as they approached the most contested waters in the Pacific Ocean. Sarah lowered her binoculars and stepped back onto the bridge, where the tactical displays showed a complex picture of military forces converging on the same patch of ocean. Red symbols marked Chinese destroyers, frigates, and support vessels, while blue symbols tracked Task Force Phoenix and Allied ships from Singapore and Australia that were conducting their own operations nearby. "How many Chinese vessels?" she asked. "7 surface combatants, plus at least 3 submarines we've been tracking since yesterday," replied Commander Williams from her position at the Tactical Action Officer's console. "They're maintaining international waters, but their formations suggest they're prepared for confrontation." Captain Barnes approached with a communications folder. "Ma'am, we're receiving diplomatic protests from Beijing regarding our presence in what they call their territorial waters. The State Department wants us to proceed with the planned transit, but avoid any actions that could be construed as provocative." Sarah studied the tactical display, noting how the Chinese formation had positioned itself to create maximum psychological pressure while remaining technically within international law. The Chinese commander was clearly experienced in the delicate art of brinksmanship that had become routine in these disputed waters. "Captain Thompson, what's the status of our air cover?" Sarah asked. The Air Wing commander consulted her tablet before responding. "We have 4 Super Hornets on combat air patrol, plus 2 EA-18G Growlers providing electronic surveillance. The Chinese have been launching their own aircraft from carriers further north, but they're maintaining respectful distances so far." "So far," Sarah repeated. "The key question is what happens when we begin our transit through the disputed zone." The Freedom of Navigation operation was designed to demonstrate American commitment to keeping international waters open to all nations. The planned route would take Task Force Phoenix directly through waters that China claimed as territorial, but which most of the international community recognized as belonging to no single nation. It was a carefully choreographed demonstration of principle that carried enormous risks. "Ma'am, Admiral Harrison on secure communications," announced the radio operator. Sarah picked up the encrypted handset, stepping into the privacy of the radio room. Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the secure link with unusual urgency. "Commander Mitchell, we're receiving intelligence that suggests the Chinese may be planning something more than routine harassment during your transit. Satellite imagery shows unusual activity at their submarine base on Hainan Island, and intercepted communications suggest high-level military coordination." "What kind of activity, sir?" Sarah asked. 3 additional submarines departed Hainan 12 hours ago. We've lost track of them in the thermal layers near the Scarborough Shoal. Combined with the surface vessels you're already tracking, we estimate you'll be facing the largest Chinese naval concentration in these waters since the crisis 5 years ago." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. "What are the revised rules of engagement?" "Unchanged," Admiral Harrison replied. "You're authorized to defend your ships and complete the navigation mission, but avoid escalation unless directly threatened. Washington is watching this closely, Commander. One mistake could trigger a major diplomatic crisis." After the conversation ended, Sarah remained in the radio room for several minutes, processing the implications of the intelligence update. The Chinese weren't simply protesting American presence. They were creating conditions for a potential confrontation that could reshape the balance of power in the South China Sea. She returned to the bridge to find her senior officers waiting with expressions of professional concern. The tactical display now showed additional contacts as the strike group sensors painted a more complete picture of Chinese naval deployments in the area. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah announced, we're about to begin the most important navigation operation any of us have participated in. The Chinese have assembled a significant force to challenge our transit, but our mission remains unchanged. We will proceed through international waters at standard speed while maintaining defensive readiness. Captain Mackenzie's voice crackled over the radio from the USS Gettysburg. Phoenix Actual, Gettysburg Actual. Recommend we increase our defensive posture given the submarine threat. Sarah considered the request carefully. Increasing defensive posture would send a clear message of readiness, but it might also signal that American forces were intimidated by Chinese pressure. The balance between caution and confidence would determine how this confrontation unfolded. All stations, this is Phoenix Actual, she transmitted. Maintain current defensive posture, but increase sensor vigilance. I want continuous updates on all contacts, but we will not appear to escalate the situation through our actions. The next several hours passed with agonizing tension as Task Force Phoenix approached the disputed waters. Chinese aircraft began flying closer to the American formation, their pilots testing response times and defensive procedures. Sarah watched through her binoculars as sleek J-15 fighters swept past at respectful distances, their cameras no doubt recording every detail of American ship positions and capabilities. Contact. Submarine bearing 090, range 8,000 yards. The sonar operator's voice cut through the bridge chatter like a knife. Designated hostile contact Alpha. Sarah moved swiftly to the sonar station, where the waterfall display showed the distinctive acoustic signature of a Chinese nuclear attack submarine. The contact was close enough to pose an immediate threat, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability about aggressive intentions. Track the contact and maintain passive sonar, Sarah ordered. Do not illuminate with active sonar unless the submarine closes to within 5,000 yards. Captain Thompson's voice came over the internal communications. Bridge Air Wing. Request permission to launch additional ASW helicopters. Sarah weighed the decision quickly. Launching helicopters would demonstrate American capability to respond to submarine threats, but it would also escalate the tactical situation. The Chinese submarine commander was likely under orders to probe American reactions without triggering a direct confrontation. Permission granted. Launch 2 Seahawks, but keep them in ready positions unless the submarine threat increases. The sound of helicopter rotors soon echoed across the flight deck as the MH-60 or Seahawks prepared for immediate launch. Sarah could feel the tension throughout the ship as hundreds of sailors prepared for potential combat, while maintaining the disciplined professionalism that kept naval operations functioning under extreme pressure. Ma'am, the Chinese surface vessels are changing course, Commander Williams reported. They're moving to intercept our projected track through the disputed zone. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting how the Chinese formation was positioning itself to create maximum pressure without technically violating international law. The Chinese admiral was clearly testing American resolve while providing his own government with plausible deniability about aggressive actions. Signal all vessels to maintain course and speed, Sarah ordered. We will not deviate from our planned route unless directly threatened. The radio crackled with Chinese communications as their ships maneuvered into position. Sarah's intelligence officers worked frantically to translate the intercepted transmissions, providing real-time updates on Chinese intentions and tactical dispositions. Phoenix Actual, this is USS Texas, came the voice of the attack submarine commander. We have passive sonar contact on multiple Chinese submarines. Count 3, possibly 4 contacts in your vicinity. Sarah absorbed this information while maintaining her outward composure. The Chinese had assembled a significant undersea force to challenge the American transit, creating a three-dimensional threat environment that tested every aspect of her strike group's capabilities. Texas, Phoenix Actual. Continue tracking, but maintain covert posture unless threatened. We need to know their intentions without revealing our own capabilities. As Task Force Phoenix entered the heart of the disputed zone, the tactical situation became increasingly complex. Chinese ships shadowed the American formation from multiple directions, while submarines maneuvered beneath the surface like invisible predators. Aircraft from both sides maintained careful distances while gathering intelligence on potential adversaries. "Ma'am, we're being challenged on international radio frequencies," the communications officer reported. "Chinese Naval Command is demanding that we identify our intentions and alter course to avoid their exercise areas." Sarah picked up the radio handset, knowing that her response would be monitored by military commands around the world. The word she chose would either defuse the situation or escalate it toward potential conflict. "Chinese Naval Command. This is USS Phoenix conducting routine freedom of navigation operations in international waters. We intend no interference with legitimate military exercises and request the same courtesy in return." The radio fell silent for several minutes before a crisp voice responded in accented English. "USS Phoenix, you're transiting waters claimed by the People's Republic of China. Alter course to avoid territorial violations." Sarah's response was measured but firm. "Chinese Naval Command, we recognize no territorial claims in these international waters. We will maintain our current course in accordance with international maritime law." The exchange represented more than radio communications between naval commanders. It embodied the fundamental disagreement between two great powers over the future of the South China Sea. Every word carried implications for regional stability and global trade routes that carried 30% of the world's commercial shipping. "Ma'am, the nearest Chinese destroyer is closing to within 3 miles, Commander Williams announced. "Their fire control radars are active but not locked onto our ships." Sarah moved to the bridge wing, raising her binoculars to observe the approaching Chinese vessel. The Type 052D destroyer was a modern and capable warship, bristling with advanced missile systems and electronic warfare equipment. Its crew was undoubtedly as professional and well-trained as her own sailors. "All stations maintain defensive posture, but do not target Chinese vessels unless they demonstrate hostile intent," she ordered. "We will not be the ones to escalate this situation." The Chinese destroyer maintained its course, closing to within 2 miles before paralleling the American formation. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see Chinese sailors on the destroyer's bridge wing, their binoculars trained on her ship with the same professional curiosity she was displaying toward them. For nearly an hour, the two naval forces maintained their careful dance, each side demonstrating capability and resolve while avoiding actions that could trigger a larger conflict. The professionalism displayed by both Chinese and American sailors prevented what could have become a maritime disaster. "Ma'am, we're clear of the disputed zone," Commander Williams finally announced. "Chinese vessels are maintaining their positions, but no longer shadowing our formation." Sarah felt the tension ease slightly throughout the bridge as Task Force Phoenix completed its transit through some of the most contested waters in the world. The Freedom of Navigation operation had succeeded in demonstrating American commitment to international maritime law, but it had also revealed the growing confidence and capability of Chinese naval forces. "Signal Admiral Harrison that we have successfully completed the transit," she ordered. "Include a detailed report of Chinese naval activity and our assessment of their capabilities." As the sun began to set over the South China Sea, painting the ocean in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The confrontation had been resolved without conflict, but it had demonstrated the razor-thin margins that separated routine operations from potential warfare in these disputed waters. Captain Barnes approached with the preliminary after-action reports from the escort vessels. "Ma'am, initial assessments suggest the Chinese demonstrated significantly improved coordination compared to previous encounters. Their submarine tactics were particularly sophisticated." Sarah nodded, studying the tactical summaries from her ship commanders. "Captain Barnes, I want detailed analysis of Chinese capabilities and tactics distributed to all commands. What we learned today could determine the outcome of future encounters." As night fell over the strike group, Sarah knew that Admiral Harrison would soon receive her report on the day's operations. The successful transit had validated her tactical approaches and demonstrated the effectiveness of her training methods. But, more importantly, it had shown that the Iron Widow could maintain American interests while avoiding the kind of escalation that had ended careers and threatened international stability. The real test, however, lay ahead as Task Force Phoenix continued its deployment in waters where every day brought new challenges to American resolve and Chinese ambitions. 6 weeks into deployment, an urgent message from Pacific Fleet Intelligence shattered the pre-dawn calm aboard the USS Phoenix. Sarah Mitchell found herself summoned to the Secure Communications Center at 0347 hours, where the duty officer handed her a classified folder marked with the highest priority designations. "Ma'am, this came in 20 minutes ago through the Submarine Communications Network," Lieutenant Commander Walsh explained, his face grave in the red lighting of the communications center. "Admiral Harrison requests immediate secure conference at 0400 hours. Sarah scanned the preliminary intelligence summary, feeling her blood pressure rise with each line. Chinese naval forces had begun what appeared to be a coordinated operation to establish permanent control over the Scarborough Shoal, a strategic reef claimed by both China and the Philippines. Satellite imagery showed Chinese construction vessels, military escorts, and what appeared to be the beginning of an artificial island similar to those China had built throughout the Spratly Islands. At exactly 0400 hours, Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the secure link with unusual urgency. "Commander Mitchell, we have a developing situation that requires immediate attention. Chinese forces began construction operations at Scarborough Shoal 18 hours ago, and they've established a defensive perimeter that effectively closes the area to international navigation." Sarah studied the tactical display in the communications center, where new intelligence updates painted a picture of rapid Chinese military action. "Sir, what are the political ramifications of this operation?" "Enormous," Admiral Harrison replied. "The Philippines has invoked their mutual defense treaty with the United States, and the president is under tremendous pressure to respond. Your strike group is the closest American force capable of challenging Chinese control of the shoal." "Well, my orders, sir." "Proceed to the Scarborough Shoal area and conduct freedom of navigation operations. However, the Chinese have made it clear that they consider the area a military construction zone and will defend it against interference." Admiral Harrison paused. "Commander, this is no longer a routine transit. The Chinese are prepared for confrontation." Sarah absorbed the gravity of the situation. Scarborough Shoal sat astride major shipping lanes and represented a crucial test of Chinese territorial expansion. If the United States allowed China to complete construction without challenge, it would signal American acceptance of Chinese control over vast areas of the South China Sea. "Sir, what level of force am I authorized to use?" "You are authorized to defend your ships and complete your navigation mission. If Chinese forces fire first, you may respond with proportional force. However, you must not initiate hostilities under any circumstances." Admiral Harrison's voice carried the weight of potential global consequences. "Commander, the eyes of the world will be on your actions. Success or failure could determine the balance of power in the Pacific for decades." After the communication ended, Sarah convened an emergency meeting of her senior staff in the carrier situation room. The assembled officers represented the combined expertise needed to navigate the most dangerous maritime confrontation since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Captain Thompson arrived first, having been awakened from her brief rest between flight operations. "Commander, my pilots are already asking questions about the increased activity. What can I tell them?" "Tell them we're about to conduct the most important mission of their careers," Sarah replied. "Captain Barnes, what's our current tactical position?" Barnes spread a detailed chart across the conference table, marking the latest intelligence on Chinese positions. "Scarborough Shoal is approximately 60 miles from our current position. The Chinese have positioned at least 8 surface combatants around the construction site, plus an unknown number of submarines. They've also established air cover with fighters operating from their carriers to the north. Commander Williams studied the chart with the practiced eye of surface warfare specialist. Ma'am, this looks like a deliberate trap. The Chinese have chosen terrain that maximizes their advantages while limiting our operational flexibility. Sarah nodded grimly. Exactly. But we can't allow that to deter us from completing our mission. Captain Thompson, what's our air capability against the Chinese air defenses? Thompson consulted her tactical planning folder. We have superior aircraft and pilot training, but they have numerical advantage and home field advantage. If this turns into an air battle, we'll win, but at significant cost. Our objective is to complete the navigation operation without triggering a larger conflict, Sarah explained. However, we must be prepared to defend ourselves if the Chinese choose confrontation over negotiation. Captain Mackenzie's voice joined the discussion via secure video link from the USS Gettysburg. Commander Mitchell, my crew is ready for whatever comes next. But I have to ask, are we really prepared to risk war over an uninhabited reef? Sarah looked around the conference table at the faces of officers who would soon lead their sailors into potential combat. Captain Mackenzie, we're not risking war over a reef. We're defending the principle that international waters remain open to all nations. If we allow China to close these shipping lanes through military force, every trade route in the world becomes vulnerable to similar action. The briefing continued for 2 hours as the staff developed contingency plans for every conceivable scenario. As dawn broke over the South China Sea, Task Force Phoenix altered course towards Scarborough Shoal and what could become the most significant naval confrontation since World War II. Ma'am, we have visual contact with Chinese construction vessels, announced the lookout from the bridge wing. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see massive dredging ships transforming the submerged reef into an artificial island. They were protected by a formidable array of military vessels. Range to nearest Chinese warship? She asked. 12 miles, and closing, Commander Williams replied from the tactical action officer's position. They're hailing us on international radio frequencies. Sarah picked up the radio handset, knowing that her next words could either defuse the situation or trigger a military crisis. The Chinese commander's voice was calm and professional, but his message was unmistakably clear. USS Phoenix, this is People's Liberation Army Navy Admiral Chun, Wei commanding Task Force Scarborough. You are approaching a restricted military construction zone. Alter your course immediately to avoid entering Chinese territorial waters. Sarah's response was equally measured. Admiral Chun, this is Commander Mitchell aboard USS Phoenix. We are conducting routine freedom of navigation operations in international waters. We have no intention of interfering with legitimate construction activities. Commander Mitchell, construction activities at Scarborough Shoal are conducted under Chinese sovereignty. Any interference will be considered an act of aggression against the People's Republic of China. The radio exchange represented the formal declaration of opposing positions, each side establishing legal justification for potential military action. Sarah knew that Admiral Chun was under orders similar to her own, defend Chinese interests while avoiding escalation, but be prepared for confrontation if challenged. Sir, Chinese air activity is increasing, Captain Thompson reported. We count 16 fighters on approach from the north, plus additional aircraft launching from their carriers. Sarah studied the tactical display as the situation developed with frightening speed. The Chinese were demonstrating overwhelming local superiority while leaving the United States with the choice of withdrawal or escalation. It was a masterful display of tactical positioning that tested American resolve at its most vulnerable point. Launch additional fighters, but maintain defensive posture, Sarah ordered. I want our pilots ready to respond, but they will not engage unless attacked. The sound of catapults launching aircraft echoed across the flight deck as F/A-18 Super Hornets streaked into the tropical sky. Within minutes, the air above Scarborough Shoal filled with some of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, their pilots maintaining professional courtesy while preparing for potential combat. Phoenix Actual, this is Hornet 1-1, came the voice of Commander Sarah Hayes, the senior pilot of the Air Wing's fighter squadron. Chinese fighters are maintaining respectful distances, but their weapons systems are hot. They appear ready for immediate engagement. Sarah felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a physical force. Every decision she made in the next few hours would be analyzed by military historians and political scientists for decades to come. More immediately, those decisions would determine whether thousands of sailors returned home to their families or became casualties in a conflict that neither side truly wanted. All stations, this is Phoenix Actual, she transmitted to her entire strike group. We will proceed with our navigation mission as planned. Maintain defensive readiness, but do not initiate hostilities under any circumstances. We are professionals, and we will act like professionals regardless of provocation. As Task Force Phoenix approached the disputed waters around Scarborough Shoal, the tactical situation became increasingly complex. Chinese submarines rose to shallow depths, their periscopes visible to American sonar operators as a psychological reminder of undersea threats. Surface vessels maneuvered with practiced precision, creating overlapping fields of fire while maintaining technical compliance with international law. "Ma'am, we're being illuminated by Chinese fire control radars," Commander Williams announced. "Multiple ships have locked onto our formation." Sarah moved to the radar repeater, watching as enemy targeting systems painted her ships with electronic beams that could guide missiles to their targets in seconds. The Chinese were demonstrating their ability to sink Task Force Phoenix while providing themselves with plausible deniability about aggressive intentions. "All ships, go to general quarters," Sarah ordered. "This is not a drill." The piercing wail of the general alarm echoed throughout the carrier as 5,000 sailors rushed to their battle stations. Within minutes, the USS Phoenix transformed from a peacetime vessel into a fully armed instrument of American naval power. Similar transformations occurred throughout the strike group as professional warriors prepared for potential combat. Admiral Chun on international radio, the communications officer announced. Sarah picked up the handset, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Admiral Chun, this is Commander Mitchell. Your targeting radars constitute a hostile act under international law. Please explain your intentions." The Chinese admiral's response was immediate and uncompromising. "Commander Mitchell, you have entered Chinese territorial waters without permission. Withdraw immediately or accept responsibility for the consequences." Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of sailors who trusted her judgment with their lives. Outside the bridge windows, Chinese warships maintained their threatening positions while construction continued on the artificial island that would extend Chinese military power deep into the South China Sea. "Admiral Chun, we do not recognize Chinese territorial claims over Scarborough Shoal. We will complete our transit through international waters in accordance with maritime law." "Then, you accept responsibility for what follows," Admiral Chun replied. The radio fell silent as both naval forces prepared for a confrontation that could reshape global politics. Sarah knew that Admiral Harrison was monitoring the situation from Hawaii, while political leaders in Washington and Beijing weighed the costs of military action against the risks of appearing weak before their domestic audiences. "Ma'am, Chinese submarines are increasing speed and changing depth," the sonar operator announced. "Designate hostile contacts Alpha through Delta, all approaching attack positions." Sarah felt time slow down as the moment of decision approached. Years of training and experience had prepared her for this moment, but no simulation could replicate the weight of commanding a nuclear-powered carrier strike group in potential combat against another nuclear power. "Fire control, this is the captain," she announced over the internal communication system. "Weapons tight unless directly fired upon. We will not start this war, but we will finish it if necessary." The next few minutes would determine whether the Iron Widow had earned her reputation through competence or merely publicity. Admiral Harrison's laughter seemed like a distant memory as Sarah Mitchell prepared to demonstrate why the United States Navy had entrusted her with command of the most powerful naval force in the Pacific Ocean. The real test was about to begin. At 0847 hours, the first Chinese submarine fired. The Mark 48 torpedo detection alarm screamed across the USS Phoenix's bridge as sonar operators tracked multiple incoming weapons. Sarah Mitchell felt time compress into crystal clarity as years of training and preparation culminated in this single moment of decision. Torpedo in the water. Bearing 027, range 4,000 yards. Petty Officer Davis's voice cut through the chaos with professional precision. Multiple contacts, estimate 4 weapons in the water. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. Emergency deep, flank speed, launch countermeasures. All weapons free. I repeat, all weapons free. She grabbed the General Communications handset. All stations, this is Phoenix Actual. We are under attack. Engage all hostile contacts with maximum force. Execute Operation Iron Storm. Operation Iron Storm was Sarah's contingency plan for coordinated strike group response to submarine attack, a tactical innovation she had developed during the Atlantic exercises. Instead of each ship responding individually, the entire formation would act as a single combat organism, with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated countermeasures that maximize defensive effectiveness while delivering devastating counterattacks. Phoenix Actual, this is Texas. The attack submarine's captain's voice crackled with combat intensity. I have firing solution on hostile contact Alpha. Request permission to engage. Texas, Phoenix Actual, weapons free. Engage all hostile submarines. Sarah's voice carried the authority of command as she authorized the first American submarine attack in decades. The sound of the Mark 48 torpedo launch echoed through the water as USS Texas fired her own weapons in retaliation. Within seconds, the undersea environment around Scarborough Shoal transformed into a deadly arena where nuclear submarines hunted each other through three-dimensional space. Ma'am, incoming missiles from Chinese surface vessels. Commander Williams announced from her tactical station. Count 12 anti-ship missiles inbound. Time to impact 90 seconds. Sarah watched the tactical display as red symbols representing Chinese missiles streaked toward her formation. The Aegis combat system aboard her escort vessels immediately responded, launching defensive missiles in a coordinated barrage designed to create an impenetrable shield around the carrier. All aircraft, this is Phoenix Actual, Captain Thompson's voice echoed across the radio frequencies. We are under attack. Engage all hostile air and surface targets. Rules of engagement are weapons free. The sky above Scarborough Shoal erupted in aerial combat as American and Chinese fighters engaged at supersonic speeds. Contrails marked the paths of air-to-air missiles as pilots from both nations fought with the skill and determination that had made them elite aviators. Splash 1 Chinese missile announced the Combat Information Center as the first enemy weapon fell to American defenses. Splash 2. Splash 3. The USS Gettysburg and USS Chosin demonstrated why Aegis cruisers were considered the finest air defense platforms in the world. Their sophisticated radar and missile systems tracking and destroying incoming threats with mechanical precision. Of the 12 Chinese missiles, only 3 survived to threaten the carrier directly. Close-in weapons system engaging. The rapid-fire sound of the Phalanx gun system filled the air as the carrier's last-ditch defenses engaged the surviving missiles. 2 more weapons disintegrated in bright flashes, but the third missile struck the Phoenix's flight deck with devastating effect. The explosion knocked Sarah to her knees as shrapnel and debris showered the bridge. Emergency lighting activated as the ship's primary electrical systems suffered damage, but the nuclear reactors continued providing power for critical combat systems. Damage control parties to the flight deck. Sarah pulled herself upright, blood trickling from a cut above her left eye. Medical teams to stations. Continue the attack. Even as damage control teams rushed to contain fires and treat wounded sailors, Task Force Phoenix maintained its devastating counterattack against Chinese forces. The destroyers USS Roosevelt and USS Lincoln launched coordinated missile strikes against Chinese surface vessels while their 5-inch guns provided continuous fire support. Direct hit on Chinese destroyer, reported the tactical action officer. Target is listing and showing signs of serious damage. Through the smoke and chaos of combat, Sarah could see the Chinese destroyer burning on the horizon, its crew fighting desperately to save their ship. The professionalism and courage displayed by sailors on both sides was remarkable, even in the midst of life and death struggle. Phoenix Actual, this is Hornet 1-1. Commander Hayes' voice crackled with excitement and strain. Chinese air cover is withdrawing. We have air superiority over the target area. The aerial battle had been brutal but decisive. American pilot training and aircraft superiority had prevailed against Chinese numerical advantage, clearing the skies for follow-up strikes against surface targets. Sarah could see Chinese fighters retreating toward their carriers as her air wing maintained control over Scarborough Shoal. Submarine contact destroyed, announced the sonar operator. USS Texas reports confirmed kill on hostile contact Alpha. The underwater battle continued with deadly intensity as attack submarines from both nations maneuvered through crushing depths. The advanced sonar systems and weapons of the Virginia-class boats gave American forces a crucial edge in the subsurface environment, but Chinese submarine commanders proved skilled and determined opponents. Ma'am, Admiral Chun is requesting communication on international emergency frequencies, the radio operator announced. Sarah wiped blood from her eyes and picked up the handset, her voice steady despite the ongoing combat around her. The flight deck behind her burned fiercely, but damage control teams were containing the fires while preparing to resume aircraft operations. Admiral Chun, this is Commander Mitchell. Your forces fired first. We are responding in self-defense. The Chinese admiral's voice carried the strain of a commander watching his forces suffer heavy casualties. Commander Mitchell, I propose immediate ceasefire. Both sides have demonstrated their resolve. Further combat serves no useful purpose. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting Chinese vessels retreating from their defensive positions around the artificial island construction site. The brief but intense battle had achieved its primary objective, demonstrating that American forces would not be intimidated by Chinese territorial claims, regardless of the military risks involved. Admiral Chun, American forces will cease fire when all Chinese weapons are safed and your vessels withdraw to a distance of 20 miles from Scarborough Shoal. The construction activities must halt immediately. Agreed, Admiral Chun replied after a brief pause. Chinese forces will comply with your conditions. The ceasefire took effect gradually as both sides disengaged from combat positions. The sudden silence seemed almost unnatural after the intense noise of modern naval warfare. Sarah looked around her bridge at sailors who had performed magnificently under fire, their faces showing the exhaustion and relief that followed surviving combat. All stations, this is Phoenix Actual, she transmitted to her entire strike group. Cease fire, cease fire, cease fire. Well done, all hands. You have upheld the finest traditions of the United States Navy. Captain Barnes approached with preliminary casualty reports, his face grim but proud. Ma'am, we have 14 wounded aboard Phoenix, 3 seriously but not life-threatening. The flight deck damage will require significant repairs, but we can resume limited operations within 6 hours. Casualties across the strike group. USS Lincoln reports 2 wounded from missile fragments. USS Texas has minor damage from underwater explosions, but no casualties. Overall, we were remarkably fortunate given the intensity of the engagement. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of command responsibility settle on her shoulders. Every wounded sailor represented a personal failure in her mind, even though she knew that combat inevitably produced casualties. The important thing was that her tactical decisions had minimized losses while achieving strategic objectives. Captain Thompson, status of Air Wing operations? The Air Wing commander approached with her flight suit still smoking from combat maneuvers. Ma'am, we lost one Super Hornet to Chinese missiles, but the pilot ejected safely and was recovered by search and rescue. Chinese losses were significantly heavier. Our pilots performed magnificently. As the immediate crisis subsided, Sarah began receiving communications from senior commands around the world. Admiral Harrison's voice came through the secure link with a mixture of relief and professional admiration that had been entirely absent from their first meeting. Commander Mitchell, this is Admiral Harrison. Outstanding work. You achieved complete tactical success while minimizing casualties and avoiding escalation to general war. Your handling of the crisis was textbook perfect. For the first time since assuming command, Sarah heard genuine respect in the Admiral's voice. Thank you, sir. My crew deserves the credit. They performed under fire like the professionals they are. Commander, I owe you an apology. When I first met you, I questioned whether political considerations had influenced your selection for command. Your actions today have demonstrated that merit, not politics, earned you this position. The Iron Widow proved her worth. Sarah smiled for the first time in hours, remembering Admiral Harrison's dismissive laughter about her call sign. Sir, the call sign was earned through tactical success, not publicity. Today simply reinforced that lesson. Over the following hours, diplomatic channels buzzed with activity as both governments worked to prevent the naval engagement from escalating into broader conflict. The Chinese agreed to suspend construction activities at Scarborough Shoal, pending international arbitration, while American forces resumed routine patrol operations throughout the South China Sea. Captain Mackenzie's face appeared on the secure video link from USS Gettysburg, his expression showing the satisfaction of a warrior who had performed his duty under fire. Commander Mitchell, on behalf of my crew, I want to say that serving under your command has been an honor. Your tactical innovations saved lives today. Similar messages arrived from commanders throughout the strike group, each expressing professional admiration for leadership that had transformed potential disaster into strategic victory. Sarah realized that she had finally earned the respect of officers who had initially viewed her appointment with skepticism. 3 days later, Task Force Phoenix anchored in Singapore for emergency repairs and crew rest. Sarah stood on the flight deck where Chinese missiles had struck, watching damage control teams complete their work while contemplating the lessons learned from her first combat command. Admiral Harrison's secure communication arrived that evening with news that would reshape her career. Commander Mitchell, the President has asked me to inform you that your actions at Scarborough Shoal have been noted at the highest levels of government. You are being promoted to captain and will assume command of the Pacific Fleet's newest carrier strike group upon completion of this deployment. The promotion represented validation that competence, not politics, had determined her selection for command. More importantly, it confirmed that the United States Navy valued tactical innovation and decisive leadership over conventional thinking and risk aversion. As the sun set over Singapore Harbor, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from Admiral Harrison's dismissive laughter to this moment of professional triumph. The Iron Widow had proven that gender was irrelevant when lives hung in the balance, and national interests required decisive action. Her secure phone buzzed with a personal message from Admiral Harrison. Captain Mitchell, I was wrong about your call sign. Iron Widow perfectly captures your approach to command. Cold, precise, and devastatingly effective when challenged. The Navy needs more officers like you. Sarah smiled, knowing that respect earned through combat was worth more than any recognition bestowed by political considerations. The Iron Widow had shut up her critics through the only method that truly mattered in military service, performing magnificently when everything was on the line. Admiral Harrison would never laugh at her call sign again, because he had learned the hard way why her enemies had given her that name in the first place.